Hello everyone and welcome to government class. Today we're going to look at separation of powers between the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government, especially how each of these branches are going to provide checks and balances to one another. As we're going through today, I really want you to keep this one question in mind. How do these principles of democracy protect the people? How do the principles of checks and balances protect your personal freedom and liberties that are outlined in the Constitution and amendments of the United States? So let's get started and take a look at those. First point I'd like to make here is with the separation of powers. So dividing different powers among three branches of government is a good thing. It splits up the work, splits up the responsibility. It also helps to hold each branch accountable for a certain part of running the nation, keeping it going forward smoothly, and also to enforce all the laws that have been outlined in our Constitution. It prevents one branch from gaining too much power, and it gives one branch the ability to check them or balance them if they feel they are gaining too much power, too much strength, or are simply out of their bounds. So each of these three branches of legislative, judicial, and executive have their own unique powers, and by being unique, they naturally balance each other out. The legislative branch is going to obviously be responsible for making the laws and making sure that there are enough laws that people have as citizens to protect them, keep them safe, and to give them the freedoms they deserve. The judicial branch is going to make sure that those laws are going to be in tune with the Constitution and in tune with their founding fathers and the nation they outlined for us. Also, the executive branch will work together with these two branches to make sure that these laws are carried out to the best of their ability. So just briefly looking at the different roles that each of the branches of government are going to have. The executive branch enforces laws. They are also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That's the president. He makes the foreign treaties, proposes laws to Congress, appoints Supreme Court justices and federal court justice, and also pardons those convicted in federal court. The president usually pardons a couple of people every year. So if you're interested in that, you can watch out for it. Also, the legislative branch, they're going to pass federal laws. They're going to control federal appropriations or spending. They're going to approve treaties and presidential appointments. This is a natural check on the executive branch. Also regulate interstate commerce or trading between the different states. And it also establishes the lower court system, and that will work together with the judicial branch. So lastly, here we have the judicial branch. It reviews lower court decisions, decides the constitutionality of laws, decides cases involving disputes between states. The Supreme Court doesn't always make a ruling on disputes between states or on cases that come to them. They may simply defer judgment so that the state ruling that came before the appeal to the Supreme Court will actually be the deciding factor in the case appealed. So let's keep moving forward. So another question I want you to think about is this, and this is not in your notes, but I just want you to pause and think about it for just about a minute. So why is it important to separate the powers of the government? So think about the other principles of democracy. Okay, so we're going to take a look at these powers and how each of them have that ability to check and balance each other, and specifically look at some things that they can do to make sure that each branch is carrying out what they're supposed to do. So these powers each branch has allows them to check up on the other branches. So it's in their constitutional rights as outlined in the first three articles, and it gives them that power. It also prevents branches from abusing their powers. So they're not going to be able to have too much power, but they're just going to have the amount that they were supposed to. Also preserves the separation of powers. So each of the different branches are going to have their own responsibilities, like you just kind of outlined there very briefly before, and it keeps them separate so that they can focus in on those jobs and keep the nation running smoothly. Also requires cooperation between the branches of government. So if the president wants to propose some legislation, it should go over to the legislative branch, and they should decide one way or another if they're going to approve it and pass it into law, or if they're going to vote it down. Also, if the judicial branch is going to make a ruling on the Constitution or establish a particular protocol based on the ruling, it's expected that the executive branch will continue to carry that out with the best of their ability. So moving on. This is just a diagram. You have this in the top of your notes, and it shows you which branch checks up on which branch. So obviously the executive branch checks up on the judicial and the legislative will check up on the Supreme Court as well as the executive branch, and the judicial branch will check up on the executive as well as the legislative. So each branch of government is going to have a check or balance on the other two branches. So it works out well, and it's a good system when it works how it's supposed to. So looking at the legislative branch, which is the House and the Senate, a few of the roles that they can have as far as checks and balances go. So they can override a presidential veto. They're going to have 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. So this doesn't happen too often, but when it does, they do need to have a good amount of votes to override what the president has signed. They can also impeach and remove the president. This has only happened twice, but it hasn't happened fully. Andrew Johnson, who was the president right after Lincoln was assassinated, was impeached in the House, but he had to be convicted in the Senate. And he was not convicted because the Senate was one vote shy of conviction. Also, in recent times, Bill Clinton was impeached in the House, but again, he was not convicted of his charges in the Senate, so he remained as president. Going forward here, the House and the Senate also ratify presidential appointments. This is largely the job of the Senate, and we see this when we have a new change in the president. Also, if anybody vacates their previous offices in the executive branches or in the federal court system. They're also going to authorize and appropriate funds for legislation. The president puts forward a budget, and it has to go to the legislative branch for approval. They have to vote on it. They have to make sure it meets everybody's expectations and standards. So, as we all know, the government shut down here a little bit ago because of disagreements over how to allocate funds for the budget. Stay tuned. We'll probably see another big debate come up here in the next couple weeks, so we'll see how that all plays out. They also check on the judiciary branch to make sure they're in line with interpreting the Constitution correctly. As people who serve as Supreme Court justices do not have a permanent position, although they can hold that position for as long as they want. So we'll touch base on that when we get a little bit further down the road here. Again, we can impeach and remove judges. So there it is. They can actually deem that if someone is not following the Constitution and not following the law, they can remove them from office. So also they confirm federal judges as President Trump had Neil Gorsuch nominated. He was confirmed by the Senate, and going forward, if it's President Trump or any other president in the future, the process will take a similar route where the president will nominate someone to serve as a Supreme Court justice, and then they will have to be confirmed in the Senate. So moving on to the executive branch, this includes the president and his cabinet members. The president and cabinet members together, obviously the president has to sign off on this, but they can propose legislation or laws to help make our country safer. The president can veto any legislation that comes forward on his desk. However, Congress can override a veto, so when the president vetoes something, that may not be the end of what happens with the bill. The president is primarily in charge of making treaties with foreign countries. A lot of times that's why we see the president and also the vice president travel to different countries. Also our Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, also travels to different countries. So we always want to have a good relationship with as many people as we can. So if we do have to make a treaty or ask people to help us out, they'll be in a good position to do that. The executive branch also checks on the judiciary. So the president can more or less decide on nominating a person that they'd like to put in with the confirmation of the Senate. So it appoints federal judges, so federal judges serving in the Court of Appeals, also in the district courts. So there have been quite a few judges who have been appointed in the federal courts, especially in the district courts, in the past few months. So also the executive branch, since they are the executor of the government, they carry out the laws, they carry out the court decisions, they make sure that what is being passed into law and what is in the Constitution is carried out to the best of their ability. Moving forward to the judicial branch, with the Supreme Court and lower courts, they can review executive decisions to make sure that they are constitutional. If they are not, they are blocked and the executive order will not go forward. They also check on Congress to make sure that Congress is passing laws that are in accord with the Constitution. If there's any laws that are outside of the Constitution, they can simply deem it as unconstitutional, and it overrides any kind of majority voting that would have been passed through in the legislative branch. They review congressional laws to make sure that Congress is operating as it's supposed to. They can also exercise this very famous concept of judicial review. So you guys have heard me talk about this before with Marbury versus Madison, but they can pretty much review anything that comes out from the president or from members of the legislative branch and make sure that they are acting in accord with the Constitution at all times. The Supreme Court's justices are appointed for life. However, when justices have been serving for a long time, often they retire, they step down, sometimes they die. And, as in recent times here, Justice Scalia passed away in office, and we were without a Supreme Court justice for about a year. Not the only time it's happened, but it is probably the most recent one that's taken place, as I think the last time that someone passed away in office was in the 60s or 70s. So just a little diagram for you here. Maybe you can fill in your diagram that's at the top of your main note page here, but it's just kind of giving you a little bit more explanation of what's taking place between the three branches of government and the checks and balances that take place. So, like for example here, the legislative branch, Congress approves the presidential nominations and controls the budget. It can pass laws over the president's veto and can impeach the president and remove him or her from office. So this is a control that the legislative branch would have over the executive. The president can also veto any congressional legislation, like I mentioned before. Over here, the president can nominate justices, and those would be confirmed by the legislative branch. The court can also declare presidential acts unconstitutional. Oftentimes we see this with executive orders. The judicial branch can check the legislative, so they can declare anything that they deem to be unconstitutional and let the legislative branch know about it. Also, the Senate confirms the president nominations, so basically the legislative branch does have the last say on who goes and serves in the judicial branch. Just one more diagram for you in case you missed it. So just kind of showing you which direction things move, who can veto what, who appoints who, and how the Constitution is enforced. All right, so just want to give you a few scenarios here and some checks and balances. So as we're going forward, just try to write down whatever you think for the following scenarios we're going to go through. If you're not sure, or if you just ran out of time and you weren't able to get it all down, you can write down what's on the following slides going through. But as we're going through these, really try to think and come up with your own conclusions. So the first one here is Congress passes the Internet Decency Act, which attempts to limit young people's access to profanity on the Internet. Some people believe that the law violates the First Amendment guarantee of free speech. So what do you guys think? What's going to be the check, and who's going to be the branch of the government that could do this? So I'll pause for a couple seconds here and let you guys think about it. Okay, let's move forward and take a look at this. So the branches that can stop or check the action would be the executive branch and the judicial. What the branch can do to check or stop the action would be the president could veto the bill. Also, the Supreme Court could declare the law unconstitutional. So those are just a couple of hypothetical things that could happen. Moving forward to another example. President Nixon is accused of being involved in illegal activities that include obstructing justice and abusing his presidential powers. So, what do you guys think? Who would be the branches of government to check and balance this? And then what are some actions they could do? Again, I'm going to pause here and let you guys think about it for a few seconds. Okay, let's take a look and see what we can do here. So the branch that can check or stop the action would really be the legislative branch. And Congress can impeach and remove the president. So in the case of Nixon, he was definitely violating his duty as president in an immoral and an unethical way, because he was responsible for sending people to break in and steal some political files. So moving on to the next example here, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution, which demands the president notify Congress within 48 hours, sending military forces into battle, and gives Congress the power to halt the use of force within 60 days. So what do you guys think? Who could be the branch or branches of government to check this, and what could they do? Okay, let's move forward here. So the two branches that can check or stop the action are the executive and the judicial. The president can veto the bill. So the Supreme Court can declare the law unconstitutional. So just to back up here a second, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before, but I'll just say it again, that the president can actually go to war or mobilize any kind of military action against an enemy that he sees fit for up to 90 days without the approval of Congress. Anything over 90 days would require Congress to come together for a joint session, and they would have to vote on whether or not we would actually go to war. So just something important to note there. All right, moving forward to the next one. Justice Kennedy steps down from the Supreme Court. He's not actually, but let's say he may step down, or someone else may step down for the sake of argument. So what could be the branches of government that could check or balance this action, and then what's something they could do? Okay, let's move forward and talk about this. So the executive branch and the legislative branches are the two that could actually check this. They can't actually prevent someone from leaving, but the president could nominate another Supreme Court justice, and the Senate can approve anybody that the president nominates to serve in the Supreme Court. So we'll have to see if there are going to be any more justices in the near future who may step down, as there are a number of them who are getting older and advanced in age, and they may consider retirement. So I don't know. We'll just have to see. So two more examples for you, then we'll wrap things up. So Congress passes legislation to establish a 5 p.m. curfew for everyone 20 years old and younger. So that'll include pretty much all of you guys. So what do you think here? Who are the two branches, or one branch, that could check this? And then what could they do to check this? I'll give you a couple of guys a couple of seconds. Okay, let's take a look and see what we can do here. So the two branches that can check this would be the executive and judicial. The president could veto the bill on his desk, and the Supreme Court can declare the law unconstitutional. Now, if the Supreme Court declared the law unconstitutional, there's not anything else you can do. But if the president vetoed the bill, is there something else that could be done? Yes. The legislative branch actually could, if they really wanted to, override the presidential veto with the 2/3 majority, and that would actually pass the bill into law. But I don't think that's actually going to come on the president's desk anytime soon, so don't worry. All right, last one here. This is going to be the following scenario. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court offers to sell his vote to the highest bidder during a court case. So what do you guys think? Who could check this action? And then what could they do? Okay, so the answer would be the legislative branch, and Congress can impeach and remove the judges. So obviously this would be an immoral and unethical behavior. So because they're out of line with the Constitution and in upholding their job and acting in a manner of integrity, they would be removed from office. So the House would have to move to impeach if they voted, and if they had a majority for impeachment, it would then move to the Senate. The Senate would then have to confirm the charges, and if the Senate had a majority, 2/3, they could then remove the judge. However, if the Senate did not have a 2/3 majority, the judge would stay, and the House would have to think if they want to reopen an impeachment case again, or would you simply wait for something else to arise? So those are a few scenarios for you guys to think about. All right, just a couple questions to wrap up here. So what are some problems with the checks and balances system? As you guys follow along in current politics, it's not a perfect system. It doesn't work exactly how it's designed to. However, it is a good system because it does allow there to be separation of powers, separation of role, separation of responsibility, and there is a certain level of transparency to the American people. However, not everything is known that really goes on, and sometimes the branches do kind of operate a little bit more covertly, and you would have to really dig around a little bit more to find out some different news articles or some different places that would post the information. Also, another point here, the Constitution is vague in some parts, so how can this cause a problem for each branch? Sometimes, the president could propose executive action, and he didn't know because there are some vagueness here that he's out of line with the Constitution. So the Supreme Court could rule, it's like, well, if you look at this article or you look at this amendment, it actually is in contradiction, so then it could be deemed unconstitutional. Or if the legislative branch puts forward a law and it's not exactly in black and white, but it's kind of in a more gray area, the Supreme Court could actually rule that law would be unconstitutional. So sometimes it's hard to know exactly whether or not that states are acting in the way they're supposed to, and also in the national government. As it says in the 10th Amendment, has not already been explicitly stated in the Constitution or in the amendments would then be reserved for the states. So oftentimes the states get into disputes among their local courts, among their local counties, and those cases may go up to the Supreme Court for decision, and could result in a conflict. So maybe the Supreme Court rules on a particular issue, and then that causes other states to then have to follow suit, whether or not that's actually what they wanted or what the people who vote for different laws in that state want. So there actually could be a few problems that could arise. Also, how does this system promote cooperation between the branches of government? Basically, it allows each branch of the government to kind of ask for permission before it proceeds to the next step. And it doesn't allow one branch of government to really act independently from the other. There is the ability to check up on it, make sure it's following the Constitution. If it's not, it has the ability to change. So it has the ability to stop the executive order, or to stop the legislation, or to remove the person from office, or to make sure that what they're going to do is really in keeping with what in the best interest of our country. So which branch has the most power? This is an arguable point. Technically, there is not a branch that has the most power. They are equal in their power. It was set up that way in the first 3 articles of the Constitution, that there would be 3 equal branches. Sometimes it may appear that one branch may have more power, it may look that way, but it might just be because that branch of the government is actually exercising more of its more of the responsibilities that they could do, and also more of the actions that they could perform. So just something to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, you got to make sure that you're following in accord with the Constitution and what's outlined in the amendments. So there you go. That's all I have for you today. Stay tuned for the next activity in class. And thank you for paying attention. And if you missed anything, you can go back and you can take a look at the PowerPoint that's attached on today's agenda. Thank you again, and have a great day.